And on the line with us is Agunda Okeyo, feminist writer, producer, filmmaker, activist. Her work has appeared in the Women's Media Center, Salon, The Daily Beast, and elsewhere. Her website is Agunda Okeyo, Agunda Okeyo, Okeyo.com. And you can tweet her at Agunda Okeyo. Agunda Okeyo, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So tell us about your thoughts on Trump and the basket of deplorables. Apparently you're involved with a protest that's going to happen in New York City tomorrow?
Yes, I am involved with a protest that's a part of a National Day of Action led mostly by women of color and our allies to get women together to protest Trump fundamentally so we can talk about the history of the GOP policies that have been sexist and racist, xenophobic towards affecting a lot of women of color for decades, and also to call for the GOP to unendorse Donald Trump.
You know, it's interesting that the press has given so much attention to Trump's bragging about being able to sexually assault women and about the women who have come forward and said that he did just that. But there has been virtually no coverage at all about the Republican Party policies. And probably, actually, Mike Pence is far worse than Donald Trump in this regard. You know, with the whole periods for Pence where he passed a law, signed a law that required if a woman has a miscarriage, she has to report it to the police. She has to have a funeral. You know, women were calling his office, the whole periods for Pence hashtag. There's no discussion in the media about how their policies are terrible for women.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of that's part of probably a national myopia, if you will, around certain issues of recognizing the longitudinal effects of the GOP, like how we got to this point. I think there's some people who are looking at this moment and they think it's an aberration. And then there's some people who, if you really do look at the track record and the journey that we've been on, predominantly since probably the late 70s, it's not a surprise that we're here.
Yeah, in a way, it's the logical extension of the the ongoing war against women that really became highly visible in the mid 70s when the prior to 73, the right to life movement was the anti-death penalty movement. And if you said right to life in 1970, everybody knew that you were talking about the people who were always standing outside the prisons when there was an execution. And the anti-abortion movement appropriated that term and became kind of the tip of the spear for the anti-women's rights movement. And then Limbaugh came along in '87 and with this whole feminazi thing. But we have gone from basically culturally acceptable behavior that marginalized, minimized, and reduced the power of women. The whole madman culture, the pre-1970s, abortion being illegal and everything else, to now that behavior kind of isolating itself within the Republican Party, or am I missing something?
Well, I mean, I think to some extent, you could say maybe there's two things kind of working together. There's a certain kind of the world is changing so quickly, so it's people are inclined to be nostalgic, Sure. So they're inclined to kind of romanticize simpler times. And a lot of those simpler moments are really not very pleasant moments for people of color, for women. For a lot of these communities that come 2050 will make up the majority of the United States. So the GOP's base, to a great extent is being kind of manipulated by that nostalgia. But also in addition to that, some people also argue about the fact that perhaps we're in this what they call a post-fact society, where what actually passes for information has very little to do with the facts of the information. Maybe people are more attracted to ideologically driven things. With the 24-hour news cycle, people are more getting their information from personalities, not sourcing their own material. So I think to a great extent what the GOP has been really, really good at is making sure that their base are a rapt audience. And their base is an audience that, so long as they give them whatever information that reinforces their nostalgia and their ideals, they don't really challenge it. I think it's a little more nuanced on the left because they're just more heterogeneous. But there's also similar issues on the left as well.
How so?
If you even look at, Bernie Sanders, he's somebody who, as much as many of his policies are very left-leaning and quite progressive, he was also kind of an ideologue. He was also somebody who people were attached to because of his personality. Whereas, you look at someone like Hillary Clinton, who on a basic fact level has actually the better experience and better knowledge about that practical application of these ideals. But she's not really a personality in the same way that, say, a Trump or a Bernie Sanders is. So it's a strange way that our society, I think, in my experience, has become much more passive, voyeuristic, much more of a televised, let's watch the TV and let it tell us what to do.
Isn't it kind of the deification of stardom?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a weird soup. You know what I mean? Like in terms of, it's kind of the celebrity thing. You could say it's a post-fact thing. You could say it's nostalgia. You could say it's just people feeling that they're losing a handle on what's going on. So they're looking for some sort of through line.
Well, it's also the death of news. I mean, up until '87, news organizations were actually required by law to provide news if they wanted the radio and TV stations to continue to get their FCC licenses. Reagan did away with that, and we moved into the era of infotainment.
Absolutely. I mean, in the 1980s, I believe in the early 80s, you had somewhere about 20-something, maybe 30-something companies that run the media, and now we have about 5 or 6.
Right.
So everything is kind of distilled itself into these kind of like empires, where people are kind of regurgitating whatever works for their pockets, basically. So it has kind of, I think, dumbed down the critical thinking and the populace. So there's a struggle going on, I think, for America's consciousness and what that looks like. So a lot of times that's what we deal with, even when we're looking at these so-called representatives in government. They're reacting to that as well.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and it's a very interesting inflection point in our history. I mean, the United States is going through a dramatic change culturally, and a lot of this is a result of the changes in the immigration laws in the '60s, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Kenyan American. I grew up in New York City. Up until I believe the late 70s, they changed certain policies that made it so that more people from the Caribbean and from Africa could actually immigrate here.
Yeah, it used to be basically that immigration quotas were based on the existing racial composition of the United States, and that changed somewhere between the 60s and the 80s, I'm not sure. Agunda Okeyo, it's such a pleasure to have and an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you so much.
Good talking.